The following presentation is a gift from the team at Streamline Publishing, publishers of Fine Art Connoisseur, Plein Air Magazine, and weekly newsletters Fine Art Today, Realism Today, Plein Air Today, and American Watercolor, and events, the Plein Air Convention and the Figurative Art Convention. We offer over 400 different art instruction tutorials and ultra-high-quality video by the world's leading artists. If you like what you see, help us support our artists and our team with your purchase. Each video aired has a special discount code for today only in the comments section with a link to the video offered. And to see everything we do, or if you want to receive notice of new releases, new products, and new events for artists, simply click the other link, which says, "See everything we do." Thank you.
Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes with Plein Air and Fine Art Connoisseur magazines. When you want to learn from somebody, you want to learn from the best. You want to go for people who are winning all the awards. That, in this case, is William Schneider. This video is going to teach you about composition in figure painting.
Hello, I'm Bill Schneider. Welcome to my video on design and composition for figurative painting. You know, as artists, we start out by learning shape, which is drawing, value, edges, color temperature, and then ultimately design or composition. Composition trumps everything else. If you have a painting that is well designed, but the rendering of the specific objects is okay, that painting will still fly off the wall. However, if you have the most wonderfully painted objects or faces, but they're poorly placed on the picture plane, or the overall composition's not good, that painting will never, never sell. As Andrew Loomis put it, all the creativity is in the planning. The rest is just good carpentry. So we're going to deal with not just carpentry, but architecture. We're going to cover having a visual concept. We're going to cover storytelling. We're going to cover placement on the picture plane. We're going to cover designing with a dominant value. We're going to cover designing with a dominant color. We're going to cover motifs, or as Edgar Payne put it, design stems. And then we're going to put everything together to hopefully design and paint a well-composed painting. So let's go. So let's talk about a visual concept. You know, the first time I heard about this, it sounded so simple that I thought I was missing something. It actually took me about 2 years to figure out, yes, it is simple. A visual concept is the most basic way you would explain a picture to a blind person. So if you're walking through the Art Institute in Chicago with your blind friend, I don't know why they're there, but they're supporting you. And they're saying, well, what's this picture? You might say, well, it's a light shape between two dark shapes. They go, oh, okay. How about this one? Well, it's objects moving back in the picture plane. Or it's about color versus colorlessness. These are all visual concepts. The key is, first of all, they're visual. Secondly, they're short, 1 or 2 sentences at most. So third, they're going to deal with shape, value, color temperature, or edge. Probably one of those 4. And shape would include movement. So, what's the point? Well, if you're working in a visual concept, it tells you what to put in, but more importantly, it tells you what to leave out. So if your painting is about a light between dark shapes, and there are these interesting little details within the dark shapes, maybe you don't need to put them in the painting because it doesn't fit the main visual concept. So let's look at a couple of examples. The first image is by Monet. There's a view of the River Seine, but visually, a visual concept is it's a light shape sandwiched between 2 darker areas. And you can see how everything within the darks are kind of subordinated and simplified, and it's really just that light between darks. Now let's look at another one. The next image is by Sirois. This is a little more complex, but let's take a look. And what we see here might be figures moving back into the picture plane in a reverse S. So again, it tells you what to put in and also what to leave out, what's important and what's not. By the way, here is something that is not a visual concept. It's about the dialectic between what is and what isn't, what is meaningful and what is not meaningful, the oppression of the artists throughout history by the imperialists. If you're going into all of that stuff, that may be modern art, it may be something, but it's not a visual concept. At its heart, the visual concept is very simple. So imagine you're looking at a painting of a model sitting in a chair. People paint this in art school all the time. They never sell, they're not interesting. But what if it's not a model sitting in a chair? What if it's Cleopatra sitting on her throne contemplating her suicide? Now you've got something to work with. And the difference, it's still a single figure, they're still seated, but now there's this whole story, there's a whole narrative that goes with it. The way to come up, or way to approach this, is think of yourself as a filmmaker. You're a director. So the first thing you need is some kind of a script, right? So what is the source of your script? Well, it could be mythology or religion. You know, those were used certainly for the pre-Raphaelites in the Renaissance. Everything was funded by the church, so they were using a lot of religious themes. It could be based on a poem or a story or a play. Again, the pre-Raphaelites, Waterhouse and others often used poems by Tennyson or Keats or somebody like that as sort of the genesis of the story. It could be history. You know, Remington did the history of the West, the vanishing West. Most of the Western artists are painting a history of the West, even though it's pretty much of a romanticized, imagined history. It's a history nonetheless. It could also be a contemporary scene, you know, a scene in a restaurant or a bar, but there's some kind of interaction. The person that's in the scene is thinking something, they're doing something, there's something more than a model sitting in a chair. So let's look at some examples. First painting is by J.W. Waterhouse, and it's based on a Tennyson poem, Mariana in the South. So let's take a look. Here we have Mariana. She is pining away, looking in the mirror at her fading beauty. The reason it's fading is because her dowry is gone and she can't be married. So on the floor are the love letters from her betrothed, who she will never marry. And it's just a rendering of that Tennyson poem. So let's look at this next painting. This is by Ilya Repin, the great Russian painter. The title of this painting is Tsarevna Sophia in 1698, a year after her confinement to the New Maiden Convent at the time of the execution of the Streltsy and the torture of all her servants. And if you look out through the window, hanging in the window is somebody suspended. They've been executed. And look at the expression on the Tsarevna Sophia. Would not want to be part of that scene. The next painting is by J.W. Waterhouse, and this is based on mythology. It's Hylas and the Nymphs. So let's take a look. Ulysses is on his quest, and he sent one of his aides, Hylas, out to gather water. But as he was gathering water, he fell under the sway of the 7 water nymphs and was hypnotized and fell into the water and drowned, and that was the end of Hylas. But again, that's the source of the script. Once you have your script, how do you treat this? Are you going to try to tell the whole story in the painting? Are you going to just illustrate part of the story, like a catchphrase or the last chapter or something? Or is it just going to be a tease? So let's take a look at this painting by Remington. So this is really telling the entire story. And the story is, it's a thunderstorm, the thunder and lightning have spooked the cows, and they are stampeding off, and the cowboys are running with them, trying not to get trampled and to head them off and rein them in. So let's look at this painting by J.W. Waterhouse, The Lady of Schlacht. It's one of his most famous paintings. It's based on a poem by Tennyson. It's been made into songs. It's been made into short movies. It's just a famous painting. But let's take a look. So this piece is illustrating really the final scene of the poem. And in the poem, the Lady of Schlacht is in a castle. She has some kind of a curse placed on her. It's never explained what the curse is, but she cannot look at the outside world except in the reflection in a mirror. But one day as she's working at her loom, Sir Lancelot comes riding by, and she can't help but be drawn to look at him, look at the handsome Sir Lancelot. As soon as she does, the mirror cracks, the threads fly out of the loom, and the curses come upon her. And so she leaves the tower, goes down to the river, gets into a boat, and goes drifting down the stream, singing towards Camelot. By the time she arrives, she's dead. The forlorn, lost lady under a curse. Kind of a reoccurring theme for Waterhouse. But here in this painting, we see her getting into the boat. On the tapestry in the boat are some of the scenes of her looking out the window, or what she sees when she looks out the window at her loom. And you see the 3 candles. 2 of them have already gone out. The third is sort of flickering in the wind. That's signifying the end of her coming life. So it's a great example of rendering a catchphrase or a scene. You could also do something that's just kind of a tease. So here's one of my paintings, and the painting is called Evening Chore. Let's take a look. It's really not doing anything more than sort of evoking, there's a person, she's doing something, she's got a pot, she's at the river, she's probably gathering water or something, but it's not really specifying the entire story, nor illustrating a specific scene, other than it's kind of teasing you as to what this whole narrative might be. You don't really know about her life or who she's working for, is probably her family, but it's a tease. So as you're thinking about setting up your story, you need to kind of go through some visualization exercises. First of all, you need to get the facts. Who, what, when, where, why. Who is the subject? What are they doing? Why are they in this situation? When is it taking place? Where is it taking place? And why are they doing whatever it is they're doing? I mean, if you get those facts, even if it's an imagined narrative, I'll tell you this, I go to the Palette and Chisel in Chicago and paint from the model. And what is it? It's a model sitting on a model stand. But if I can get some kind of a mental story rolling in my mind so that I know who is this person, what are they doing, if I can create that narrative, even though I'm working from a figure on a model stand, I can superimpose enough of the emotions that it will actually work as a painting. But you need to visualize these things. What are the characters like? Who's the main character? Who's the supporting character? Where is it taking place? What's the clothing like? What kind of accessories do you need? There's a dramatic way to tell any story, and it's up to us as the artist to find that drama. We make the big bucks because people want us to superimpose some kind of a narrative onto the scene, something that will draw them in. And oh, by the way, we want something where there's meaning to it. The best paintings are about more than just the subject. So it might be not just about soldiers in a field, but it's about courage, or it's about honor, or it's about love, or it's about pride, or it's about family. Something that's a big universal theme. If you can pull that into your painting and have that in your mind, it'll come through onto the canvas. So let's take a look at some examples. I'm using a lot of Waterhouse paintings, and there's a reason for that. My whole interest in composition was sparked by seeing a Waterhouse exhibit in Montreal. I would go in the morning, then I'd leave and go back and get my wife for lunch, and then I'd come back in the afternoon with her, then she'd go back to the hotel, then I'd come back again at night, making notes and studying. About the third day, the light bulb started to go off, and I realized what Waterhouse was doing. And he was a master composer, master designer, and a master storyteller. And so I'm using a lot of Waterhouse as reference because you'll get hopefully some of the same magic that I got from him. So let's take a look at this painting. I won't tell you the name quite yet. If we look at the painting, this is not a contemporary painting, right? And it's not in Victorian England where he lived. It's probably in the Middle East. You can tell from the gratings on the window and the arches and the costuming. And if you look at the figures, they're becoming more and more emotive as you go around the semicircle towards what is obviously the main figure, the figure in black. And so the title of the painting is called Consulting the Oracle. And the oracle, you can not even make it out in the painting, even if you see it in real life. The oracle is a mummified head, and the priestess is leaning close to hear the sotto voce whispered words of the oracle, and she's telling all the women who are consulting her, wait, hold on, and that is being told by the gesture of the hand, which, by the way, is the sharpest edge against the lightest light in the painting. And oh, by the way, the head that's bowed in the middle, the woman is so filled with emotion she can't even take it anymore. That head is in the exact center of the picture. There's a dramatic way to tell the story, and this painting, better than almost any ever made, tells you a story in great drama. So now let's move on to talking about placement on the picture plane. Because if you've got your story, you've got your narrative, you know about your characters, you still need to put them on canvas. So let's look at some ways to design the painting on the canvas, some places you can put your centers of interest. So let's talk about placement on the picture plane. First of all, I'm going to put on some glasses. Here's a great tip for you. As artists, try not to age. You know, my eyesight was 20/20 until I was in my 50s, and then I started needing readers. So I'm going to put on some glasses. When you're trying to figure out where to place objects on the picture plane, the first thing they tell you is don't put anything right in the center. And they also tell you don't put anything in the corners. So how do you place items on a picture plane? Well, one way is to do this sort of tic-tac-toe, and I'm just eyeballing this, where you divide the plane into thirds. And that's very simplistic. Will it work? Sure, you could put a center of interest overlapping any of these intersection points, and it keeps you out of the middle and it keeps you out of the corners, but not very interesting. So let's look at something else. I'm going to erase this, and I'm going to draw what's called the armature of the rectangle. It didn't erase very well, but close enough for rock and roll. So the armature of the rectangle, if you draw lines from corner to corner, probably could have been a little straighter, corner to corner, and from center to corner, and center to center, any of the intersection points can theoretically be a place to put a center of interest. Intersection points or bound by intersection points. And you don't normally have to fill in the entire armature, but if you do, you get kind of this cat's cradle that really divides the picture plane into a number of areas. And you can see, you could put something at this point, maybe filling in here, and then maybe something over here bound by this area, and you're going to have sort of a natural balance. It keeps you out of the corners, and it keeps you out of the center. So the armature of the rectangle has been used for hundreds of years, really since the Renaissance. And we're going to look at some examples in a little bit that show how artists use this. And when you look at the examples, you'll realize that these pictures that you've looked at that just inherently look correct were designed. People had made conscious decisions to use these elements. Now, in addition, there are other methods you could use. You could have the armature of the rectangle and then overlay on top of that circular designs or S designs or something else. And we'll see some of that in the examples as well. So it's possible to make this more complex even than it is. But you know what? There's another method that I find very useful. It was developed by Alphonse Mucha, who basically created Art Nouveau. He started out with posters of Sarah Bernhardt, but he created all of the looping, swirling designs that you'll see some examples in a minute. And you'll recognize these images because they've been widely used. Mucha's basic idea was that the natural world is divided in the ratio of 2/5 to 3/5. And he came up with that because, you know, if this is 3, then this is 2. If this is 3, this is 2. The way insect bodies are segmented, the way plants grow. He found this all over nature and said, that's a great design principle. So he came up with the idea that if you divide the picture plane into a series of sort of interlocking 2 versus 3 segments, you could come up with very intricate inorganic designs. And I'll get into that a little more in a minute. But you can overlay that on the armature of the rectangle. So let's look at an example. Here's a partial armature of the rectangle overlaid on the Waterhouse Hylas and the Nymphs painting. And what do you see? Well, all of the heads touch one of those lines. That was not an accident. Waterhouse, in his studies, studied this sort of thing. And you can see that the main figures are all encapsulated in that trapezoid that kind of goes from the figure in the center and encapsulates Hylas and 3 of the 7 nymphs. When I started drawing this out at the Musée des Beaux-Arts in Montreal, it blew my mind how every single painting was designed using this sort of method. So let's look at another one. Here is the Lady of Shalott, also laid out with the armature of the rectangle. But take a look. There's a vertical line that goes right across the center of the painting, but to the left of that there's another vertical line. That line is 2 from the left and 3 from the right. So Waterhouse was using Mucha's ratio of 2 to 3 even before Mucha wrote his treatise on this. But you can see how she is laid out within the armature of the rectangle, but also her head is just bumping against that 2 to 3 ratio. And again, it creates this natural, organic look. The painting just looks right. But it's designed and positioned based on some of these principles. So let's take a look at Sirois' famous painting, Mending the Sail. Beautiful painting. Again, everybody in the painting, it looks natural, it looks correct. But now let's take a look at this painting overlaying the armature of the rectangle. And again, you see all of the figures are touching that line except for 2. The one man who is silhouetted against that light and the woman who's kind of touching the dark-haired woman on the left. You might even consider them as one group. And in fact, that's what I do. I think it's one group. If you imagined a circle around the intersection of the line that goes from corner to center and from the top center to the corner and drew a circle around those women, it's kind of a centrality of focus encapsulating the 4 women. And they're balanced by the figures on the right-hand side. And notice how the line from corner to center really kind of defines the whole angle of movement of the painting as the sail is receding into the distance, sort of replicating single-point perspective. Again, super design. So let's take a look at a painting by Anders Zorn, famed Swedish artist. This is called Bread Making. And again, the figures look like they're sort of randomly and naturally spaced around. But let's take a look at this. Notice that the main figures fact, all figures are touching one of those lines. And in fact, the woman who is probably the center of interest, the woman with her kneading the bread in that big tub, her head is bound by the intersection of a couple of those lines, and the other secondary figures are all touching. Even the child on the floor. I don't think that happened by accident. I think that Zorn used some of his training and applied it to making a great painting. And oh, by the way, what's the story here? The story is just making bread. It's a domestic scene. That was a contemporary scene of his time. But it tells a story. There's something more to it than a model sitting in a chair. So let's take a look at another great painting. This is by Bouguereau, and it's in the Musée d'Orsay in Paris. This painting is phenomenal. And let's look at the birth of Venus. So here we have Venus emerging from the half shell, and she's surrounded by these different mythological creatures, heralding her birth. And there are, you wouldn't call them cherubim and seraphim because it's not religious, but certainly these flying figures going into the clouds. It looks almost like a religious painting of the Renaissance, but let's take a look at the design. So here we have what I was talking about earlier. We've got the armature of the rectangle, defining where Venus's head is and where her arms are. But you see that there's two interlocking circles. The two interlocking circles were often used in the Renaissance to show the ascension of the Virgin Mary, and there would be angels up in the top and mortals on the bottom, and then Mary going between or something. This is very much like a religious painting from the Renaissance, but instead of religion, it's based on mythology. One of the beauties of Mucha's idea of 2 versus 3 is that you can think of it as an equation. Oh no, math. But think of it this way. If you divide 2 by 2, you get 1, and if you divide 3 by 2, you get 1.5. Which means you can use the handle of a brush to measure things. So I've got a brush here, and I can measure 1 unit, remember 2 divided by 2 is 1, on this side to 1.5. So I can adjust by moving my thumb up and down this. So it's very useful in the field, or if you're working from a live model. Okay, so this point is 2 from the left and 3 from the right. Right there. So I could put a center of interest on that line someplace. And I could also divide that vertically, 2 from the top. To be a little bit shorter. And this is not absolutely perfect, but I'm just eyeballing it. That's about right. So this is 2, and this is 3. And I'm just showing the subdivisions. So if I put that intersection point, I could put some kind of a center of interest right there. But then I might want a second center of interest, so now it starts to get more complex. So I think that the 2 versus 3 of this section is right here. And then I could divide this, maybe I'll take it from here. So I'm using something, I decided I wanted some kind of a center of interest in here. And I'm going to take the bottom of that area, that circle, and divide that into 2 and 3. So there's 1. hair smaller. So dividing this, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, and intersecting it over here. So I could put another center of interest at this point. And then I could keep on dividing the picture plane. The beauty of this is that it inherently looks right. There's a logic and an order to it, even though the viewer can't exactly figure out what that logic or order is. They couldn't overlay the armature of the rectangle and have it come out exactly on these points. And certainly it's not the tic-tac-toe. But again, it has that rightness to it because there's a logic, there's an order to it. So let's look at some examples again. What we're going to look at are some actual drawings by Mucha to illustrate a treatise that he wrote on composition. And I don't know where you could find this. I got a Xerox copy from an artist friend of mine, and I haven't really tried to Google it or look it up. But it's almost unreadable, but the pictures, if you take the time to work your way through them, are excellent because it explains his principles. The reason it's unreadable is that English was not even his second language. He was Czech and moved to Paris, so his first language was Czech, his second language was French, and his third language was English, and he wrote it in English. But anyway, let's look at this image. So here we see him showing an example of a way to lay out 4 figures. And you've got kind of the main figure, which is the woman in profile, or certainly the main 2 figures are the woman in profile and the face that's touching hers. But notice that the edge of the woman in profile's head is 2 from the left and 3 from the right. And if you take that same space and divide it 3 from the left and 2 from the right, you get the edge of the woman's head on the right. And furthermore, you can divide the space with the 3 on the left, and you'll discover that the woman on the left is 2 from the left versus 3 from the right of that space that's also subdivided. So this is kind of a simple example for Mucha, but let's look at another one, gets a little more complex. So here's Mucha trying to lay out a landscape. And you can see he's putting his main center of focus, that big mass. We don't even know what it is, but I guess it's trees or something. But it's 2 from the left and 3 from the right. And it's also 2 from the top and 3 from the bottom. He's dividing the area to the right into 3 from the left side of that right area and 2 from the right side. So again, using the ratio of 3 to 2. And the center point is lining up with the bottom of the circle. That's the centrality of focus from the first one. So he's using this sort of branching method. And then he's dividing the area on the left into, again, the ratio of 3 to 2, and dividing it. You can see some of the marks that he's made, indicating, how it's divided. 2 from the left and 3 from the right within that area, but you can also see how he's dividing it vertically. And again, when you see something like this, it organically looks correct. It has a logic and an order to it. Now, if you superimpose this on top of the armature of the rectangle, you have a wealth of ways to organize your picture space. So let's take a look at the painting that I did, Evening Chore, and I can tell you exactly what I was thinking of. I wanted it to line up on this diagonal line, which, by the way, doesn't exactly go to the corner, in the ratio of 2 from the right and 3 from the left. And I can tell you I was thinking about that when I planned it out. And also, you could superimpose other lines. I actually did that when I did the drawing, but this gives you a good idea. Now, one thing that I haven't used, there are other methods, the golden mean or the golden rectangle, a Fibonacci spiral, in case I'm pronouncing that correctly. I don't use those much because they don't fit in the measurements, in the ratio of normal stretcher bars or normal panels. And so you can superimpose them, but then you've got areas left over on the side, And so I don't really use those as a design tool. I probably should or could. The armature of the rectangle, and I use Mukas to 2 versus 3 all the time. And I find that when I do that, the paintings lay out well and look well. We've talked about placement on the picture plane. We've talked about storytelling. Let's talk a little bit about some design motifs, if you will. Edgar Payne, the great landscape painter, wrote a book called Composition of Outdoor Painting. And I would strongly advise you to get that book and copy these design stems, he calls them. But I'll show you some of them. So, first one he called a steelyard, which is really kind of a balance beam with maybe a big weight closer to the center, counterbalanced by a small weight. And this is all obviously within a picture plane. So an example of that, we make a little picture plane, might be a big tree here. He did this for outdoor designs, counterbalanced by a smaller mass over here. And if you didn't have this small mass, the whole painting would tip over. So that's the steelyard. He also used another design stem, if you will, almost like the steelyard, balance scale. So here you've got a scale, and it's got 2 equal weights on either side. It's a more formal kind of a structure. The example he gives is a mountain in the middle with 2 sort of equal masses of trees. Maybe they're slightly different shape, but about the same weight. So it's a balance scale. Another design stem or motif is the circle. And it could be a circle that's sort of an ellipse because it's flattened out or laying down. But a circular motif might be, the example that he gives is a lake. And there's mountains back here and another mountain here and some stuff. But it's kind of the circle of this lake in the picture plane. He also gives the example of a bunch of clouds kind of forming a circle in the sky with the landscape below. But again, using that circle design. Another very useful one, particularly for figurative painters, is the S design. And it might be a reversed S as well. And if you think of a model standing in contrapposto, where the weight is on one hip and not the other, feminine model, you get this nice S curve, or somebody laying down or seated. But in Edgar Payne's world, it might be a river kind of feeding into the background. Here's the horizon line. And you can typically put things at the corners of the S. Maybe the river goes like that. But it's winding into the background. That is often used in landscape paintings. Another design stem, again, these are just motifs, is kind of an L. Again, this is very useful for figure paintings because you can have a figure that's seated. Maybe she's seated like this. She's got her hair in a messy bun. Here's her body. And seated cross-legged, kind of forming an L with background stuff. Another very useful design stem, because you can sort of make almost anything out of this. So if you have a center of interest and radiating lines leading into that. And so you can imagine, I've got actually a painting by Dan Gerhardt, which has a farmhouse it's actually a group of farm buildings, but then the sky has got clouds in it, and the clouds are kind of leading you in. There's the horizon leading you in. There's some trees that lead you in, and then there's corn. It's in winter, but the remnants of corn stalks are sticking up through the field, and they're leading you in. So it's the radiating design. And you can set this up for your figurative paintings, where if you have fabric, you can have folds of the fabric sort of leading you into the figure. You can have objects that are placed to lead you into the figure. Very useful, the radiating line. Another design is the tunnel. And the key to the tunnel is it sort of bounds everything, and there's usually maybe some perspective leading through the tunnel, and there might be something, a center of interest on the other side. So if you can imagine, if this was, a wall, and you're looking through the wall to the courtyard beyond, and there's a tree in the courtyard. That's the tunnel design. Another great one, because it implies action. If you have flat horizontal lines, that's very restful and implies peace, stability. If you have vertical lines, that's sort of countermanding that. But if you have a diagonal line design, that puts a strong dynamism, if that's a word, to the composition. And that's what I used in that painting of the evening chore, where I had, there was a duck there and the woman's figure, and then the body of the water was a strong diagonal design, gave a lot of movement, even though she was just sitting there. In landscape painting, and the elements that Payne showed, you might have the side of a mountain, and it's kind of irregularly shaped, and then maybe another mountain back in the distance, but that creates that strong diagonal. So let's take a look at some of Payne's actual drawings from the book. And I apologize for the quality. These are just Xeroxes out of the book. I encourage you to get the book. You can get it at Derus Fine Art, D-E-R-U-S, R-U-apostrophe-S, Google them, or you can get it at Amazon. So I'm just going to put up some Xeroxes from the Edgar Payne book, which I strongly encourage you to buy if you don't already own. If you're a landscape painter, you undoubtedly already own this book. But I encourage you to take your notebook and draw each one of these design stems and the examples. I don't know if you're like I am. If I look at something or think about it, I won't remember it. But if I draw it, the information travels up my arm and into my brain where it stays. And so I encourage you to draw these. But here are the examples: the steelyard, the balance scale, the O design, the S. There's a pyramid. We didn't really talk about that, but you can see it's three elements forming a pyramid. There's a cross, so you've got usually the horizontal of the horizon, and then some strong verticals like ship masts sticking up through that, or strong vertical trees. The radiating line we talked about, the L. A suspended steelyard is just a steelyard upside down. You don't use that too much in figurative painting, but in landscape painting it might be reflections in the water. I didn't really talk about three-spot, but that's having three central points of interest kind of spaced around in a triangle. So there's the other designs. I guess another one that I didn't talk about that I should have is the silhouette. And the key to the silhouette, if you look at the example, is you have one mass that's clearly a separate value from what's behind it, and then all of the values within that mass are pretty close. So often it might be in a backlit situation where you've got the one mass kind of silhouetted against something light. I use that quite a bit in figurative work. But those are the painted designs. And again, I encourage you to copy each one of those. I encourage you to get the book and copy from the book and actually read what he has to say about these. So let's look at some examples of how this has been applied in paintings. So we talked about one of my paintings that used the diagonal line, Evening Chore, as sort of the root of the painting. Here's another one of my paintings in which I used a circular design. So you can see you've got kind of a circle on the right-hand side with the light coming through it. It also is a bit of a silhouette because all of the trees to the left of that circle are strongly silhouetted and you don't really see a lot of variation within. There's also a hint of a steelyard because that mass is counterbalanced by the tree off on the left. There is also a hint of an S. You can see the S forming in the grasses in front and leading up to the centers of interest. So you can overlay and combine these different motifs. Here's a figurative painting using kind of an S design. If you start at the top of her head and go down her left arm, you can see it kind of leads in an S, and then the blouse on the right is completing that side and then leading back into her body. It's also a bit of a steelyard because her figure is counterbalanced with the figure in the mirror. So here's another one of my landscape paintings, a cityscape, and this is built around the radiating line. If you look, you can see everything going into that light in the middle. So you've got 1 point perspective, the line of the street lights, the line of the buildings on the right side, the buildings and the curb on the left side. Everything is kind of leading you into that point. And in fact, being a city and being man-made, they're all straight lines. If that was a landscape, they might be curved and more gently meandering lines leading you into that focal point. But nonetheless, that's built on the radiating line. So we've talked about using these design motifs and overlaying them with placement on the picture plane. So now let's talk about designing with a dominant value. You know, maybe I should have done this in the beginning because the real key to composition is the distribution of major blocks of light and dark. You know, value does all the work, color gets all the credit. It's like being a lineman in football. You do all the work and the running back gets the big bucks and the hot girls. But you can tell I was a lineman. So, one way to think of this is imagine you've got a picture plane and if you think of the background as very light, so it's a snowstorm, or it's just it's going to be a magazine cover and you're going to use the white of the paper. Whatever it is, it's a light background with small amounts. I'm actually going to shift and use markers here just so you can see the difference. Shifting to markers, if you've got a background that's light, and if you have a small amount of a dark mass, and I don't know what this is, but it's something, and you have small amounts, if we do this in 4 values, so you've got black, white, light gray, and dark gray. So you've got a white background, small amounts of black, and small amounts of light gray, and then small amounts of darker gray. That automatically becomes the center of interest against the white background. If you get the book by Andrew Loomis, Creative Illustration. He talks about 4 basic value designs: a white background, a light gray background, a dark gray background, and a dark background. So he would number these. This would be a 1. A number 2 design, again, might have small amount of black in the middle. I'm not sure what that is, but it's something. And then there's a small amount of white, and then the bulk of the background is light gray. So I'm going to put the light gray kind of around this, and I'm going to leave some space for the white. And then if we put some of the darker gray, kind of interspersing, so it's maybe kind of a cityscape or something. Maybe there's a mountain back here. In any case, the number 2 design is a light gray background with small amounts of black, white, and dark gray. So the key is you have a background and you have small amounts that automatically become the center of interest somewhere, so that the mass, the most square inches, is that background color. So let's look at a number 3 design. So number 3 is going to have small amounts of black. Let's make it more jagged looking. I don't know what it is, but it's some kind of a design. Small amounts of white, and then everything around it is dark gray, except the light gray elements, and I'm going to leave some space for light gray. So I've left space for light gray and white. So maybe this is an evening scene or a nocturne, or something with a dark background. So there's small amounts of lighter gray in some of these areas. But again, you're creating a center of interest by having the contrasting values somewhere offset against that major background. So this is a 3 design. And the final design, and I'm going to draw the center of interest first, and then put the background around it. So the number 4 design, you've got a center of interest that will have some darker gray, I'm sorry, that was the lighter gray, and then here's the darker gray around it, and there's going to be some white. And then all around that, you have the dark background. So this is the number 4 design. If you think about that, maybe there's some dark coming into this. So you see a lot of 2, 3, and 4. And the 4 design, or the 4 composition, imagine that this, instead of just being a blob, is a figure with a golden helmet, reflections and highlights off the golden helmet against a dark, rich, warm, deep dark background. And who might that be? It's a Rembrandt design. David Lafell uses the number 4 all the time. We'll have a dark background and then light leading into the center of interest, and you've got light gray, dark gray, and white against the dark background. When I do demonstrations, I'll often pick this because it's the easiest one to pull off in terms of having a very clear center of interest offset against the background. But each one of these works. This is rare because it's rare to have the background so light, although it might be a beach scene under bright sunlight or a snow scene. Often compositions that you see in paintings are a number 2 or a number 3. So let's take a look at some examples. Here we have kind of a graphic showing the 4 design stems, or the 4 value stems, if you will. Number 1, most of the area is white, and then there's small amounts of black, dark gray, light gray. Number 2, it's a light gray background, small amounts of the other 3. Number 3, dark gray background. Number 4, dark background. But here's a painting. We all recognize this. It's Whistler's Mother, right? The actual title of the painting is Arrangement in Grain Black, Portrait of the Artist's Mother. And so if we desaturate this, you can see that most of the square inches are probably the dark gray. You know, the wall behind the mother and the floor, I'd call those dark gray, with small amounts of black, white, and then light gray like her flesh and the image in the picture on the wall. So I'd call this a number 3 design, but notice how the darks are all connected except for the picture frame, the 2 picture frames. And it's a very geometric design, but generally, if you can connect particularly all the darks, and if you can have the other values at least pointing to each other, if not connected, you'll have a stronger painting. David Lafell has a great quote, and he said something to the effect that a painting composed of a number of small value masses will look petty and small. Think about that. If you have a painting with a few major masses of value, then you've got something that's more monumental. So let's look at another one. This is a painting by Degas. It's about a dance lesson. So you've got the center of interest, the dance instructor. But let's look at this desaturated. This is either a number 2 or a number 3. I'd say it's probably a number 3 design, where the most square inches are a dark gray. But notice how the darks are all connected. If you start in the lower left, you've got some kind of an object on the floor, a picture or something. bleeding into the dark that goes up to the dark by the model with her back to us, and then up through the ribbon on the back of her neck to the dark next to her face, to the dark of her hair, to the dark leading into the ribbon on the neck of the other dancer, going all the way up to the top. And that dark also in the middle went to the rim of the doorway and then connected with the dark shapes of these others behind. You can follow that all the way across, and it's pretty much connected all the way through. The lights also form kind of a ribbon going through the background, and they're not exactly connected, but they're pointing to each other. It's one ribbon of light from the models or the dancers' dresses ribboning throughout the painting. Very well structured painting. So hopefully you've got the idea that you can use value to really hold the painting together. So when we're thinking of placement, it's where you're placing big masses of value. And like I said in the beginning, value does the work, color gets the credit. So if you can design a painting with big masses of value and have them connected as much as possible, you're going to have a strong painting. Before we leave the topic of value, let me show you one thing. I've got my iPhone set up here. I have a love-hate relationship with this thing. But there is a neat little app. Let me open this up. And we'll set it here so you can see it. It's called Notanizer. And so you can take a photo, and I'm going to import a photo so you can see. Then we'll just pick one with a model in it. So here's one. So it imports it as a black and white image, but then you can set it up in what the Japanese call notan, which is just pure white and pure black. And this little slider allows you to change where the crossover point is. Can you see that? You can also set it up for 3 levels. And you can use the slider to change the crossover point for each of the levels, where it goes from black to gray and from gray to white. So it allows you to rapidly compose an image, or you can do it as 4 levels, like the Loomis scheme that we were just talking about. And again, you now have 3 sliders on the bottom, so you can control the crossover points, where it goes from black to dark gray to light gray, and light gray to white. So this module, we're going to talk finally about color. Remember I said that value does all the work and color gets all the credit? That's not 100% true. Value does 95% of the work, but color does another 5%. And color can certainly be a design tool. So let me tell you a story. The traditional artist's color wheel has the 3 primaries, red, yellow, and blue, equally spaced around a wheel. And there was a physicist, a guy named Munzel, and he said, that's very interesting, but that's not really the way light works. So he came up with a different color wheel. And his color wheel, I've got a printout here. You've got red, yellow, green, blue, and purple. So he's added green and purple and sort of equally spaced them around. So you might say, well, so what? Here's the so what. If you have red, and in a traditional wheel, they say green is the complement of red. If you mix red and green, you do not get a gray. You get kind of a warmish brown. But if you mix red with blue-green, you get a true gray. If you mix anything across this color wheel, you'll get a true gray. And again, you might say, well, so what? From a design standpoint, here's the so what. If you have a red background and you put a little dot of blue-green on that background, you cannot help but look at that. That becomes automatically your center of interest. So it's a great way to direct the viewer's eye. If you take the discords, which are 2 steps on either side of the complement, so you've got a red field and you've got a blue-green center of interest, and you put a little bit of yellow-green and an equal amount of blue-violet right next to that blue-green, that reinforces the effect. It almost hypnotizes the viewer. So they cannot help but look at that. And it doesn't matter if the red is a high chroma red, or if it's very grayed, if it's dark, if it's light, doesn't matter. So you can adjust the value and the saturation of the color. You could have a bright blue-green against a very grayed red, and it could be a very light grayed red or a very dark grayed red. It doesn't matter. And you can use value and saturation to adjust these, but if you follow that little formula, you cannot help but look at that as a center of interest. So let me do a quick demo. I'm going to take this down, although we'll refer to it as we go. I'm going to make some little picture planes. We'll do a couple of them. Maybe we'll make this one a little bit larger so you can see it easier. I'm going to do a red background, and let's make this a number 4 value design. So it's going to be a dark background with small amounts of lighter colors, you know, something that's close to white, something that's light gray, something that's dark gray, but on the very dark background, but it's going to be a dark red. So I'm going to mix up a dark red. So here's some red, here's some black. So it made it really dark, and it also lowered the saturation. It's now a really grayed dark red. And I'm going to, I don't know what the center of interest might be, but let's use kind of an S design with something in here. I'm going to just leave some space for that. Maybe it's a river, maybe it's a road, who knows. But now I'm going to fill this in. So maybe it's a night scene lit by a volcano, so we'll make some of that red more saturated. It's still going to be part of the red background, but we'll make it, there can be a little bit of difference. But it's still going to be a number 4 design. And I encourage you to do these little abstracts. They're fun to do, and since there's no subject, since you're making it up, your personality will come through. It's a hoot. When I do these in my workshops, some people make things that look like Indian rug designs, other people look like landscapes, some look very organic, some look like alien scenes. I mean, it's really cool. So now we've got sort of the background, and we've left space for the other 3 values. So if you have a red background, what do you want the center of interest to be? Blue-green. So I'm going to take some blue, mix a little yellow into it, and we're going to make this a really light value. By the way, I didn't talk about my colors. You'd probably like to know what I've got on my palette here, so I'll just kind of walk you through this. Alizarin crimson, cad red medium. Normally I use a permanent red medium made by Rembrandt. It's non-toxic, it's cheaper, it actually mixes better, but didn't have any with me. This is permanent orange, yellow ochre, raw sienna, cad yellow light, and I've got two kinds of white. I've got pure titanium white and I've got lead white, and I use that mixture because I don't want anything with zinc in it. Zinc makes the painting film brittle and the paintings will fall apart too soon. This is a violet, and I'm not even sure which violet that is, ultramarine blue and ivory black. So to go back to the demo, so I've got a very light value blue-green. In fact, I'm going to make it almost white. And I think we want the center of interest to be like right here. Maybe there's a little bit at a hint of that at each corner. And maybe there's a darker value. And maybe it's a little less saturated, so I'm adding some black to that. By the way, I think of black as a grade blue. If you look at the Zorn palette, Anders Zorn made his wonderful paintings with 3 colors plus white. And the colors were vermilion, which is like a cad red medium, yellow ochre, ivory black, and white. And that was it. And he made most of his paintings using that palette. And you can create an astonishing array of colors. But anyway, so here we've got a darker grade version of that. I may cover that up because I don't want to have the center of interest down here. In fact, I'm going to get rid of this one. I can cover that with a red. Try to keep the centers of interest up higher. And just to really strengthen the value structure, I'm going to put some pure white right here, just to sort of punch up the value difference, and maybe a little pure white in a couple of other spots. There's one. How's that then? Okay, so we've got a red background, blue-green centers of interest. And that looks more blue than green. I'm going to green it up a little bit. So you can just kind of play with this. There's a little more blue-green. Now, somewhere near that center of interest, you want to have equal amounts of the two discords. So looking at your Munsell color wheel again, the two discords are each 2 steps away from the complement, which is blue-green. So it's going to be yellow-green and blue-violet. So I'm going to mix up a yellow-green, and I'm going to make that kind of a grade. So I'm mixing this with yellow ochre and ivory black. And I'm making it kind of a more mid-value. And I'm putting some of that around the center of interest. And then maybe there's some lighter yellow-green too. So I'm showing you that you can play with the value and the saturation, and this effect still works. Now I'm also going to need some blue-violet. So I'll put a little blue-violet in there. And I'm going to make that really grade too. So I'm going to use alizarin crimson and ivory black. And I'm adding a little bit of white because otherwise it's just so dark. Oops, maybe that's too much white. Well, we'll see. I'm putting equal amounts of that near that center of interest. Maybe there's some light areas. So I'm just playing with this. You know, when we were little kids, we didn't make masterpieces with our crayons, we played with them. You must become as a little child to enter the kingdom of heaven. So, I'm going to fill in the red on that S shape. I'll just make it a little bit lighter, but still keep it part of the red background. But it's a variation. It's kind of a texture. So you still get the effect of the S, you know, using one of Edgar Payne's design stems to kind of lead you in to the center of interest. And now, if I want to punch that up even a little more, I'm just going to put a little dab or two of pure ivory black right next to the white, just to make it so blatantly obvious that that's the center of interest. So there you go. Little abstract composition. What is it? Who knows? Mine always look sort of landscapish, in part because I use the Edgar Payne design stems. But, you know, you could form a little company, abstract on demand. So we've got a lady that's got a red couch and she wants a painting to match the red couch. There you go. Now we could do one that's not in red. Let's do a light value. Let's do one that's, violet. So we're going to make a light value background. In violet. And we'll make it really light. Make it almost a number 1 design. I'm going to leave space. I'll use kind of a steel yard. So I've got a big mass there, and a smaller mass here, and maybe there's some radiating lines going into that. So we're leaving space for that. And so this is, maybe it's a hazy day and we're in some kind of a landscape thing. But it's still a violet background. And maybe as you get down here, it's a darker violet. And it's less saturated. So it's a very almost gray color, but there's still some of the violet peeking through. Maybe that's too dark. That would probably be good for the foreground. So I encourage you to just do these little exercises as rehearsal, just to play. And then it gets lighter as it goes back further. And lighter still right before it comes to that center of interest. And maybe there's some little darker areas showing through. So we've left room for kind of this steelyard design. So the complement of violet is yellow-green. So I need some yellow-green. This may be too saturated and too dark, but we'll see. I think it needs to be, I'm feeling like this is a misty kind of a setup, so we'll make it more indefinite. And this yellow-green on the other side is going to be very grayed and very light, almost part of the background. Oops, it's not very light. So this looks kind of landscape-ish, and maybe this extends up a little higher. It looks sort of tree-like. So the discords are going to be orange and blue-green. What happens if I put some pure orange on this? No, that doesn't quite look right. Looks like it's too dark for this structure, so I'm making some orange that's a little bit lighter in value, and I can kind of mush it into this other stuff. So let's put some of the other discord in here. So the other discord is blue-green. We'll put some of that down low here. Okay. And maybe it's connecting these because we want the darks connected. And again, I'm using a little bit of this S to kind of lead you in. And again, often it helps to, or at least I find this helps, to have some of the very lightest value somewhere near your center of interest. So I'm putting some pure white. Maybe there's a little pure white right here. And also some pure black just to really hit home on this exercise. Maybe there's black down here where it's in the foreground. So now we have an abstract to sell to a lady with a violet couch, but we're following the same sort of formula. I encourage you to do these exercises. So this is the final module, and now we're going to start actually making a painting using all of these principles that I've been rehearsing in the first part of the video.
Hey, would you like to win a beautiful painting worth almost $3,000? We've got a beautiful Joe Bouguereau plein air study that he's done of the sunset in Maine. It's gorgeous. If you want to have an opportunity to win it, go to paintinggiveaway.com. Just put in your email. That's all you've got to do, and you only need to enter once. We'll be giving away the prize at the end of May. Go to paintinggiveaway.com.
Leatherdoll Art Video is proud to present William A. Schneider, Composition Secrets for Figure Painting. This instructional video brings you everything you need to know to plan and execute your absolute best figure paintings.
Composition trumps everything else. If you have a painting that is well designed, but the rendering of the specific objects is okay, that painting will still fly off the wall. However, if you have the most wonderfully painted objects or faces, but they're poorly placed on the picture plane, or the overall composition's not good, that painting will never sell.
Watch and practice right along with Bill Schneider as he leads you through critical composition lessons that are a must-do before you begin your painting. Visual concept, storytelling, placement, design motifs, and value and color as design. You won't want to miss 1 minute of this incredible lesson-filled video where Bill proves that planning ahead is what will help you create paintings that you are confident in showing and selling. In addition to the detailed lessons, Bill dissects the design of beautifully crafted paintings from revered artists. Paintings you have probably seen before and will see much differently once you know the incredible design structure they follow, design that you can now use in your own paintings. Bill also conducts a full start-to-finish painting demonstration where he puts into practice everything you've just learned in the lessons. Pause, replay, and paint until you have mastered the techniques that could be the key to advancing your own artwork by leaps and bounds.
So I'll compare all my edges to that sharp edge. I'll compare all my lights to this lightest light, and I'll compare my darks to the darkest dark.
A highly acclaimed artist, Bill's work has been showcased in dozens of art galleries and magazines. He's an in-demand workshop leader who is a natural at teaching other artists how to accelerate their skills. This story is what will inspire you to paint more and grow as an artist. Adding this video to your own resource library is like having a one-on-one teaching experience with Bill Schneider. Only you get to watch and pause as many times as you'd like. Available on both DVD and as a digital download. William A. Schneider, Composition Secrets for Figure Painting, will come to be a trusted resource for you as an artist.
That was Composition Secrets for Figure Painting with William Schneider, and you can learn more about that at lilyartvideo.com. What do you say we get to know William a little bit now?
Hi, I'm Bill Schneider. I'm a painter by trade, oil and pastel, and I'm most interested in figures and portraits, but I like everything else. I like everything to do with art, and I admire artists in all different media and in all different styles, but for me, I love the figure and the portrait. I would describe my style of painting as realism leaning towards impressionism. I'm not using the broken color approach of the French Impressionists, but I'm using more broken stroke kinds of things that I'm calling it Impressionism because it's not traditional realism, and by traditional realism I mean like the John Singer Sargent approach, where you have a unified, definite shadow pattern creating the illusion of three-dimensionality. That's more of a light and shadow painting. Mine tend to have elements where the edges are broken or disguised. I'm just more interested in that. I think it's more attractive. And so that's what gives it sort of the impressionistic feel. My grandparents, when I was 9, bought me a set of oil paints and said, go out to the studio, which was my great-grandpa's old studio, and play with oil paint. I, on the other hand, would never give a 9-year-old kid a set of oil paints and say, go play someplace, because they'll get over everything. My use of color and paint helps with, I guess, what you'd call my style. When I was in art school at the American Academy, I was coached and instructed not to try to find a style. And the reason for that is if you try to say, okay, I'm going to do things this way all the time, then you develop sort of mannerisms and limit yourself. I was advised, and I think this is great advice, to just try to be honest. And that just like everybody's handwriting is different, everybody's paint application will be different. And so if you try to find a style and stick to it, it will limit you rather than helping you. So I'm more interested in the way I apply the paint and the way I use the colors to try to convey an image. And if somebody else looks at it and says, that's a William Schneider painting, it must be his style, rather than trying to have a style, so to speak. What inspires me to paint now is the world. You know, I am most drawn to people. I think we're more interesting than landscapes or still lives, although I do those as well. But there's so much nuance to the human face. I mean, we evolved to be able to express so much with our face. We're the naked ape. In fact, there was a famous book about that. And so we've got movable eyebrows. The eyebrows tell you a lot about what somebody's thinking, you know. Are they got a furrowed brow? Are they looking at you? Are they quizzical or whatever? I mean, you get these different movements of the eyebrows and the movements of the mouth. And we are so attuned to seeing these subtle changes that indicate the underlying emotion. And so I find that incredibly intriguing. And to try to capture it in paint, because we paint in slow motion. You know, I'll be painting a model and she'll go through 100 different expressions while she's sitting there, and I have to kind of pick and choose. So it's interesting, it's challenging, but that's what turns me on. The hardest thing about painting a portrait or a figure, or anything for that matter, is staying focused. You know, painting is, in one sense, it's kind of a Zen activity. And what I mean by that is you have to be here now. You can't be there later and be putting strokes down. Richard Schmid calls this one activity licking, where your hand is making motions on the canvas. You're painting a stroke, usually the same stroke over and over and over, while the brain is someplace else completely different. So if I could just remember everything I know from the first stroke to the last stroke, I would do nothing but crank out masterpieces. But it's learning to be in the present and to be reacting and to have intent for each of those strokes. And whether it's a still life, a landscape, or a portrait or a figure, it sort of doesn't matter. Now, the thing that's a little more challenging with portraits and figures is not only being here now, but someplace in the back of your brain having this ongoing narrative that, okay, I'm here, I'm painting the model now, she's in front of me, but in my mind, she's not just a model sitting on a chair, this is Cleopatra sitting on a throne. And she's in the play Romeo, the Mark Antony and Cleopatra, the Shakespeare play, and it's the scene before she's going to be bitten by the asp. Whatever it is, I've got this movie sort of playing in my head, and so I have to be present and still have that movie circulating to capture that narrative. So it's juggling those two things. Makes for a challenge. The other subject matter for art that interests me, I would say, in order would be portraits and figures, landscape, still life, and often what I do in my figurative work is include a still life with the figure, or do a figure outdoors, and so I'm including the landscape in with that. But it's really everything, you know. At the American Academy, they said if you can paint a head, you can paint anything. And so we were expected to know how to do landscapes and still lives and figures and portraits. Although in the painting class, they never had us do landscape or still life. We were always working on the figure. I like oil. I also love pastel. And each of those mediums reinforces the other. There are things you can do in oil that are devilishly difficult to do in pastel. For example, to get a thin, rich, deep, transparent, warm, dark is a piece of cake in oil. and mix some transparent oxide brown with some ultramarine blue, let the brown predominate, add some mineral spirits to it, and you've got a nice thin transparent dark. Pastel, not so much. I would say the thing that is the best about oil is it's so forgiving. You know, if you want to do something really hard, paint in watercolor. Because you put an edge down and you forget it and don't watch it and let it dry. Once you have an edge, you can't get rid of it. So there's no correcting in watercolor. You either get it right or you throw it away. Oil paint, you know, I've had paintings that I've sent off to a gallery and they hadn't sold. And it comes back a year later, and I look at it with a year more of experience under my belt. I say, well, I know why that didn't sell. The values aren't right here, and I can fix it up. I can actually paint on top of it and correct it. And I've done that and fixed up the piece that came back. It's now a year and a half old. Ship it out again, it sells right away. And so it's very, very forgiving. What I do sometimes is, especially if I want to get some rich darks in the pastel, is I'll use my Terry Ludwig Extreme Darks 2, I think is the set, which is the best darks there are. But I'll use those, and then I will paint over the top of it with alcohol, let that dry. So now I've got sort of this flat base in the pastel, and then I can do pastels on top of it. The thing that I find most difficult about painting with oil is everything. You know, shape, value, color, temperature, edge, composition. You're juggling 5 chainsaws. And, you know, you've got to get the drawing right. That's the first thing that, you know, most people say, well, I don't know anything about art. But I know what I like. And what they like is accurate drawing, first and foremost. So if you don't have the right parts in the right place, forget everything else. But that takes you maybe 90% of the way there. But then you've got to have the values correct and in the right relationship. And you've got to have the edges in the right relationship. And you've got to have the color temperatures in the right relationship. And that just gets you to the point where, okay, now I have all my tools. What story am I going to tell with this? And so you've got to remember all the technical stuff, and you've got to have that movie running in your head. And you've got to be capturing the expression that reinforces whatever your narrative is, the gesture that reinforces it, the you know, accoutrements that, you know, if somebody's wearing old rumpled clothing, maybe that tells you that they've had a long, hard life or something. You know, you can reinforce all of these elements. So it's multi-layered. And any one of them can be easy if it's working right, and any one of those elements makes it hard if it's not working right. The painting I'm most proud of is always the one that I just finished. It's like if you have girlfriends, you love your current girlfriend, you don't care about the one 2 girlfriends ago. Not that I have girlfriends anymore. I've been happily married for, you know, many, many years. But you fall in love with your most recent effort, and then after a few days, you start to see all of the warts and the flaws in it. And then maybe you correct it again or whatever. But, you know, I have paintings that have worked very well. And I have paintings that have won tons of awards. There is a painting called The Red Queen. It's a pastel painting. And that won awards in almost every show I entered it in. There's another one that I did fairly recently, within the past year, called On the Road to Mandalay. And that won awards in every competition that I entered it in, and it sold. And I could have sold that painting 5 times. Now, why that one? It all just worked. You know, it's like there's a scene in the movie Little Big Man where Dustin Hoffman is talking to the Native American chief, and the Native American chief has had it with life and all of the trials and tribulations. He lays down and he's going to die. And he's laying there. He opens one eye, am I dead yet? And then he says to Dustin, well, sometimes the magic works, sometimes it doesn't. And that's the way it is with the painting. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes we don't even know why. You think, wow, I did everything that I know how to do in this painting. I think it's pretty good. Why is it not getting the reaction? And then maybe I come back to it in a year and I realize why. So I wonder sometimes why anybody should choose to paint figures or portraits. I'll tell you this, if you're doing a landscape and you move a tree over 20 feet because it fits the composition, who knows? It just makes for a stronger painting. You take a nose and you move it over a 1/4 of an inch, you got serious issues with your painting. And so I love portraits and figures because they're the most challenging. You know, it's like if you're a scratch golfer, you don't want to play little short par 3 business golf courses. You want to play challenging courses. And so portraits and figures are more challenging because we're so used to seeing humans that we spot the errors. Even the most inexperienced connoisseur or viewer will spot every error in a painting right off the bat. So it keeps you on your A game. I hope that these videos, that this video in particular, will help people's skills because one of the great advantages we have in our time is this kind of technology. You know, back in the old days, you know, the peak of representational art was probably late 1800s until recently. And at that point, you know, guys like John Singer Sargent or Anders Zorn or Sirois or any of these great masters, once they finished their basic art education and they had learned how to render a figure or how to create a scene or put multiple figures into a scene, then they were expected to go off to the Louvre or the Prado and copy masterworks to really learn it. Nowadays, we can throw a DVD into the player and watch somebody doing something that we're trying to learn, and we can slow it down, we can stop it, we can go back, we can look at it multiple times. So we have this great educational resource. And so what I'm hoping is that what I'm trying to do is divide the world of art into modules. And so dealing with specific modules like how do you paint a hand? How do you compose a painting? How do you use value to compose a painting? How do you use color to compose a painting? So it's sort of breaking down this huge world of issues into little bite-sized chunks so that people can work on those chunks separately. I hope that this has been useful. I was very fortunate in that when I went to the American Academy, I had one of the greatest figure drawing teachers, Bill Parks. And later on, after I got out of that school, my friend Dan Gerhardt told me that I should teach workshops, and I resisted. I didn't want to do it because I started late. You know, I was in my 40s at that point. And I told Dan, you know, I don't need the money. I don't want to do this. I want to work on my own art. And he said, no. You should teach for 2 reasons. One, you had great instructors and you owe it to the world to pass it on. And 2, you will learn more by working with students than by just working with yourself. And I found both things to be true when I first taught a workshop. So these videos are really sort of a broad, a way to disseminate these workshops more broadly. But I always think I'm passing on the wisdom of Bill Parks, the wisdom of Harley Brown, the wisdom of Dan Gerhardt, all of these great artists that I've had the privilege to teach me. And you know, I'm saying very little in these that are original. I'm mostly just, I'm blessed or cursed with a pretty good memory. And so I remember what people said to me. And, you know, C.W. Mundy said, you know, don't insult the viewer by spelling out every detail. Well, that sticks in my brain. So I pass that on to you guys. So thanks for watching. If you'd like to check out more of my artwork or look at my blog, I put a lot of information in my blog. You can go to www.schneiderart.com. And that's SCHNEIDERART.com.
That was Composition Secrets for Figure Painting with William Schneider, and you can learn more about it at lilyartvideo.com. I hope you're enjoying your day. Thanks for watching.
Lilydal Art Video is proud to present William A. Schneider, Composition Secrets for Figure Painting. This instructional video brings you everything you need to know to plan and execute your absolute best figure paintings.
Composition trumps everything else. If you have a painting that is well designed, but the rendering of the specific objects is okay, that painting will still fly off the wall. However, if you have the most wonderfully painted objects or faces, but they're poorly placed on the picture plane, or the overall composition's not good, that painting will never sell.
Watch and practice right along with Bill Schneider as he leads you through critical composition lessons that are a must-do before you begin your painting. Visual concept, storytelling, placement, design motifs, and value and color as design. You won't want to miss 1 minute of this incredible lesson-filled video where Bill proves that planning ahead is what will help you create paintings that you are confident in showing and selling. In addition to the detailed lessons, Bill dissects the design of beautifully crafted paintings from revered artists. Paintings you have probably seen before and will see much differently once you know the incredible design structure they follow, design that you can now use in your own paintings. Bill also conducts a full start-to-finish painting demonstration where he puts into practice everything you've just learned in the lessons. Pause, replay, and paint until you have mastered the techniques that could be the key to advancing your own artwork by leaps and bounds.
So I'll compare all my edges to that sharp edge. I'll compare all my lights to this lightest light, and I'll compare my darks to the darkest dark.
A highly acclaimed artist, Bill's work has been showcased in dozens of art galleries and magazines. He's an in-demand workshop leader who is a natural at teaching other artists how to accelerate their skills. This story is what will inspire you to paint more and grow as an artist. Adding this video to your own resource library is like having a one-on-one teaching experience with Bill Schneider. Only you get to watch and pause as many times as you'd like. Available on both DVD and as a digital download. William A. Schneider, Composition Secrets for Figure Painting, will come to be a trusted resource for you as an artist.